You're good? Okay. Hello. How are you? No. At least one person in the room who took one of my classes. I'm Karen Leeker. I'm a lecturer in the Entrepreneurship program, and I'm going to talk to you about engineering, entrepreneurship, and product development. I got all three of those topics. Try to do that in a short period of time. Okay. Just a little bit about me. I have an engineering degree, industrial engineering degree from Purdue, and I got recruited out of college to go work for a small company called Procter & Gamble. And I went to work at Procter & Gamble for what I thought was going to be about 2 years, and I ended up staying for 27. So I have a really long career at Procter & Gamble and was able to do a lot of different things. And one of the things nice about a large company like that is about every 18 months to 2 years, you get a new assignment. So you get a new job, but you don't have to change companies, and you don't have to do that, to pick up your whole life and move. So I've had, after I left Procter & Gamble, I was VP of Innovation and Quality for Solo Cup. I'm sure you all know those red Solo Cups, right? And I was a VP of Innovation for Velcro Group. Those of you from outside the USA might not be familiar with the brand name of Velcro, but it's on every backpack, and it's the hook and loop material. So I spent time there. And then I was also a senior VP at an energy efficiency company. After that, I've had my own business for 9 years, and I've worked with startups here on campus, and I'm teaching now 3 sections of Entrepreneurship 200. So my background, I'm an engineer, and when you talk about innovation, people go, what is innovation? What does that mean? Innovation is really the process of taking ideas and turning them into revenue, making money for them. So I've done that on a global scale at Procter & Gamble, as well as the other companies I've worked with, and the innovations or the products I've launched are about in excess of $1 billion. So I've done this many, many times. I also know product development, so I spent many years in product development. Product development is a rigorous process inside companies, but it's also a process that entrepreneurs use in order to develop new businesses. With Natalie, you talked with Natalie last week. She and I developed a product development course for the technology school that's being taught there that goes over the principles of product development. So that's an opportunity for you to get some additional learning if you want to. I also have a very strong background in marketing. You don't work for a Procter & Gamble and not get marketing expertise. So I have both B2B. Does anybody know what B2B means? Business to business. And B2C, which is business to customer or consumer. Okay? At Solo Cup, you could go to the store and you can buy Solo Cup at Walmart or Payless or any place, Target, you want to buy them. But also when you walk into Starbucks, you look at the lid, and half the time it says Solo Cup on there. So Solo Cup sold to McDonald's and Starbucks and Panera Bread and Chick-fil-A. Every place that you get, takeaway products, they would sell there. So which part of their business do you think was bigger, the B2B side or the B2C side? The what? Correct. It was about 80% of their business, and the B2C side was only 20% of their business. So I understand both of those. Along with that, a lot of financial analysis and management. And I also had the opportunity, while I was about the last 5 years I worked at P&G, to work in their licensing group. So this was a term called open innovation, where I licensed technology from small inventors, entrepreneurs, other companies into Procter & Gamble so we could accelerate our development process And I also took Procter & Gamble products to other major Fortune 500 companies and negotiated the licensing of that. And that was all around intellectual property. And intellectual property is either patents. I pretty much worked with patents and trademarks. Trademarks are the brand names. Okay? So that's kind of my background, which is why I'm here. I know Natalie talked about this last week when she talked about innovation. So what is it? You take ideas, theories, things you think about, you dream about, and you turn them into something. You turn them into a product, either a physical product, a software product, or a process, a new way to manufacture computers, a new way to harness energy from solar panels. Those are processes that also have the entrepreneurship thing. So there's a new term that's being talked about a lot called an intrapreneur. An intrapreneur really does what an entrepreneur does, but they do it within a corporation. And so many corporations now have, Google has their Alphabet company, okay? They have a group of Google people that are Google employees, but they're separate from Google, and their main job is to come up with these new ideas. So they're not worried about how many sales did Google get last month, how many ads did they sell. They're not worried about the current business. They're worried about what's going to happen in the future. And so those people are called intrapreneurs. They pretty much do the same thing. And then there's the whole management of it. You have to manage the people, the process, the technology. So in engineering, in product development, in entrepreneurship, in intrapreneurship, you always think about, well, you have a plan, you execute the plan, you do these steps, and you get the output. Nice, simple, straight line. But that's not reality. Reality is you're making lots of twists and turns. You're learning lots of different things. You think you're going here. Oops, wow. I didn't know that was a touch screen. All right, I'll go back. You think you're learning, okay. Well, now there we go. You think you're learning, you're changing what you know, you're refining the product, you're refining the process, you're getting more information along the way, and then eventually you get success. Okay, so engineers and entrepreneurship. I'm biased, I'm an engineer, so of course I think you're the most important people in the whole entrepreneurship process. And they have an advantage. You have an advantage. Why do you think you have an advantage? As I know Andrew just told me about 80% of you are engineers. Why would you think you have an advantage in entrepreneurship, being an engineer? Yep.
Because we understand the technical process of how something is made, we can think logically through steps that from design, development, all the way through to the end product.
Very good. Very well said. Any other reasons why you think you might have an advantage? Yep.
I feel like engineers might be a little more creative than other people, and they kind of have like a design mindset as opposed to some people.
Well, there's all different types of creativity. I think you're right that you have creativity in a way that a marketing person wouldn't have creativity, where you could actually make something. When I was at Procter & Gamble, we had a lot of PhDs working there. They were all scientists. And the saying we had was, scientists want to figure out why something works, and engineers just want to make it work. And so engineers are the ones that, in companies, that they get things to work, they get it out there, they get it out the door. And they're usually the last people to touch the product before it leaves. The other advantage that you all have now is you understand math. And as complex as the world is right now and all the big data that is out there, there are very few people that understand what to do with that big data. How do I analyze that data? How do I even get my arms around it? There's so much data. How do I even know what to do with it? But I'm going to talk about some other reasons, other advantages. One of the big advantages you have is you know what's possible, right? Because you're involved with technology, you understand how the world works, you know what's possible. You can also talk to the customer, and you can listen to what they want. And then you can take those customer needs and translate them into technical requirements. I used to have somebody at Solo Cup that we had all these salespeople, and they would come in, they go, oh, the customer wants a 6.5-inch diameter rim lid with a cup that's this dimension and that dimension. And I'd go, well, what are they going to do with it? And they're like, what do you mean? I go, well, is it going to be a hot cup? Is it going to be a cold cup? Are they going to put smoothies in it? What are they going to put in it? Well, I don't know. They just wanted these dimensions. And that's not listening to the customer, right? That's what you just come back and you say, oh, well, I think the customer wants this size cup. Listening to the customer is really understanding, what do they want? What are they going to do with the product? How is it going to go through their process? Are they going to put it in some restaurants, they have those dispensers for lids. Others just have them stacked up. How many do they want in a stack? How often do they want to order them? What are the other needs they have? Oh, and what are they willing to pay for that? Because here's a nice cup. Starbucks isn't going to pay for that. So what's the cost that you need to work with him? And then you can solve problems. Not everybody can solve problems. Have you realized that now? Going through engineering school, when you were in high school, you thought you could solve problems, right? What's different now that you're here taking these classes? What are you realizing about problem solving that maybe you didn't realize before you came? Yep.
There's not necessarily one way to do something.
Correct. Yes, there's not just one way to do it, right? And that makes it more challenging, right? And then you have the opportunity to build a product that exceeds the customer's needs so that the product can almost sell itself. So when we talk about know what's possible, this is a quote that is from St. Francis of Assisi. Start by doing what's necessary, then do what's possible, and suddenly you're doing the impossible. Does that make sense? You're an entrepreneur. You have no clue. First person who ever made a mouse had no clue how that mouse was going to work, right? But they did what was necessary. They kind of did some prototyping, and they put some things together, and then they looked at what else is possible, and they added it to the mouse, and all of a sudden they got something that was impossible. So it's about experimenting and doing. And knowing what's possible, you think that, with all the information out there in the world, you think, oh, anybody can know all this stuff. But that's true. Anybody could know it if they were interested in it, if they wanted to know it, if they had the time to know it. You're interested in the way things work. You're interested in what's possible. You're interested in technology and what's happening in the future. So you're going to know this before other people are. Does that make sense to people? Anybody ever play that game called telephone? You know what that is? If I tell you something, and then you tell him, and he tells the person there, by the time it goes all the way around the room, is it what I told her? No. Kind of, maybe. In lots of organizations, they want salespeople to go out and talk to the customer. And then they talk to the marketing people to tell them what the customer wants. And then the marketing people tell the engineers what the customer wants. And guess what? What happens? It's just like the telephone game. By the time it gets to the engineer, it's different than what the customer actually said. Also, you can hear things differently. So if we take the cup example, if somebody said, oh, they're going to be putting, 120-degree coffee in this with creamer in there, you would be thinking, oh my, I have to look at a material that will withstand 120 degrees coffee with creamer and not leak. A marketing person's not going to be thinking that. A salesperson's not going to be thinking that. And in your mind, you're already going, okay, I've got that technical requirement there, so that you don't even have to ask the customer. You already know from your technical expertise that that's something you're going to have to look for. Right? So you can do that in a much better way. I had, when I was at Solo Cup, they did that. The salesperson would go out and they'd tell marketing, and then they'd come back to my design people, and it was always not correct. And so I started having my designers go with the salespeople. And they were very reluctant to have that at first. But then once they had a meeting, when they had the design engineers with them at a customer, then they called up all the time wanting the engineers to go with them, because they realized that they didn't have to do all that translation. And they got it right the first time. So this is just kind of what happens a lot. I'll let you read that. So translating those into technical requirements. This happens a lot in corporations. It happens a lot in startups, and it happens all the time in software. Software is hard to wrap your arms around. It has so many moving parts to it. So people code one part of the software, and then they think they've got that right, but it doesn't interface with the other pieces of the software. Or once they code it, they see, oh, we could do something different, and then the requirements change. And so people get upset with this. So this is something you want to prevent. You want to make sure you understand what the requirements are, and you can translate them. You don't need other people to translate that for you. So, there's lots of models out there for problem solving. And one of the things you'll hear a lot in the lean startup books and things like that, entrepreneurs should pivot. Oh, you should pivot. What does that mean to you when you hear that? Have you heard that term when they talk about you pivoting? You've heard? What does it mean to you?
Change direction.
Yep, change direction. Anybody know the Groupon story? Well, Groupon was built in Chicago, and I met the number 3 employee that they had. And there were 2 guys who were funded by this billionaire in Chicago. And their original idea was to have a website where people could discuss political issues. So it was a site that they built where you could put a topic in, and then you could have a bunch of people commenting on your topics. The person that I met, he was a finance student at IU, and his father knew the investor, and he couldn't get an internship. So his dad found him an internship with these 2 guys. It was an unpaid internship in the summer. And he was studying finance, so he did everything that they, like he bought all the computers, and he bought lunch for them, he managed the office. And toward the end of the summer, the investor was really frustrated and said, you guys haven't made this they're coding and coding and coding, but they haven't done anything with it. They're not getting any revenue. Nobody's using the system. And he said, I'll give you 3 months to figure out what to do with this. And the finance intern, he was at lunch in downtown Chicago. He was at a restaurant. And he said, you know, if I brought 20 of my friends in here, would you give me a discount? And the restaurant owner said, sure, I would. And so they started talking about that idea, and they said, well, what if we sold a bunch of, coupons to different restaurants and brought people in? And that's how they pivoted. Now, what they did was they took what they already built, which was this platform for people to interact with, and they just started selling Groupons. Now we call them Groupons, but they were coupons for, discounted meals and things. So this finance person didn't go back to school. He started hiring a lot of people to go talk to all the business owners in all the various areas to get them to sign up for the Groupon. Now, right after that, you think, okay, well, that's kind of an interesting idea. But right after that, there were a lot of other companies that popped up trying to do the same thing. There was Living Social. I don't know if you remember that one. Amazon tried to do it for a while. I don't know how successful Groupon is. I know they, went public and everything like that. And I know that that guy will never have to work again if he doesn't want to. But they were successful because their back end that they built, their website that they built, that they spent all that time coding on, was superior to anybody else. And they could do things those competitors couldn't do. And so that's why they were successful. But that's an example of a pivot. They didn't really identify the problem. They identified the problem. They thought people wanted to talk about political issues. Now, maybe if they started that now with the political climate in the world now, it might have been more successful. But they didn't really identify the problem very well. They identified a solution, and they were looking for a problem it was going to solve. So the whole part of the problem-solving thing is to make sure you're working on the right problem. There's a bunch of, like you said, there's not just one way to solve that problem. So you have to look at all those alternatives and choose the best one that's going to help you get to where you need to go the quickest. And then you implement. But then many people don't really do this last check to say, is it working? Do people like what we built? Do they want what we built? If not, you have to go modify. So when you look at a product includes all of these things, right? Features, design, user experience, but it also includes naming and branding and differentiation. I always like to talk about the iPod. How many people think that Apple was the first one to do an MP3 player? Well, you guys aren't old enough. Maybe you are. Did any of you have an MP3 player before the iPod? Yeah. And how are you able to get the music onto that MP3 player? Yeah, you had to drop files, or you had to get them off of illegal places, right? Or you had to take your CDs, and so you had to buy the music and transform it and put it onto this MP3 player. Many people think that the iPod, people bought it because of the sleek design. It really had nothing to do with that. What was the big innovation that Apple had? What? The iTunes Store. That's what was the main reason the iPod was so successful. And so that's how they had to differentiate. So with the product, they were talking about the user experience. The user experience, many people, I see all these Macs here, many people think that Apple really, the reason people love it is because it's so easy to use. That's true, but if they still couldn't get the music onto there, they wouldn't have sold any more than the other people did. It wouldn't have taken off like that. So their differentiation was in the business model, or the way you could get access to the music, which had nothing to do with the design, right? So you have to look at all aspects. And how do you differentiate yourself? So now I'm going to switch gears here. Well, I'll just take a breath here and see if anybody has any questions. Any questions? No? All right, I'm going to switch gears and talk about product development. Anybody, who knows what product development is? Have you heard it before? Yep.
Is it like the process that a product goes through, like as it progresses and kind of gets more specifications of what it needs to be, and then eventually like it's kind of handed out?
Right. It's exactly what it is. I'll give at Solo Cup. When I was there, McDonald's was introducing oatmeal. Oatmeal hasn't been on the menu very long, and so it was like, McDonald's needs an oatmeal cup. How are we going to do an oatmeal cup for McDonald's? So it's that whole process of understanding what McDonald's needs are, coming up with prototypes, coming up with pricing of those things, presenting them to the customer, having the customer choose among your competition which one they want to go forth. And then not only once you do that, then there's the whole process of, okay, which machine am I going to make it on? What's the tooling going to look like? Where am I going to get the materials? How are we going to print McDonald's on that cup? And how are we going to ramp that up to make 1 billion of them by a date that they say they need them? Okay? That's the same thing you do as an entrepreneur. You do that as an entrepreneur, but you do that for your business. Same process. You still have to figure out how you're going to get it to the customer. So in corporations that are not driven by McDonald's needs an oatmeal cup, they have strategies. They want to grow by 15%. They want to go to a new country. They want to get into, I'm working with a transportation company now. They want to get into the connected freight, and they're all talking about this last mile. Everybody's trying to figure out, how do I get something quickly to people's individual homes? So whatever their strategy is, there's lots of different ways you can accomplish them. Just like you said, there's not just one way. There's lots of choices that corporations need to make. So they go through a whole ideation phase and they say, oh, these are all the projects we could potentially do that would help us meet our strategy. As an entrepreneur, you're going to have to do this as your company grows. So if you look at, look at Uber, or look at Airbnb. They've been around not very long. They started out with having people rent the rooms. Now you can have experiences on Airbnb, where you could, have somebody take you skydiving, somebody take you rock climbing. You can have experiences. So every company needs to grow, and they need to develop a strategy in how to do that. And there's many different ways you can get that done. And so they go through an ideation phase where they come up with as many ideas as they can. You took my class, right? I made you guys come up with how many ideas?
Initially, you made us do 5 minutes.
Right, but you had a project where you had to come up with 100 ideas, right? It wasn't that easy, was it? Yeah, it's not as easy as you think. But that's what happens in corporations. You come up with lots of ideas, and then you go through some sort of evaluations. The evaluations are, sometimes they're financial, sometimes how long will it take us to do that? How much R&D would that cost? Do we think we could sell enough of them? Do we have internal resources to get this done, or do we have to have other people? And then there's a short list, and then you execute and implement. So that's a typical process. Within that process, once you say, okay, now I have a project, I'm going to have a project, and we're going to do the new McDonald's cup, 80%